my dad always told me that you only get one name, so invest in it accordingly. And I always thought about that. I thought it was a really good line. Just like you only get one name. Like you can change your companies, you can go bankrupt, but like your name stays with you.
Yeah.
And so that can either be an asset or it can be a liability.
Well, I usually ask my guests, how did you get this job?
So I was a management consultant right out of college. I did space, cyber, and intelligence for the military, which was sounds much cooler than it really was, but I had a top secret clearance. It sounded really good at dinner parties and just about only that. And one day I looked out from my balcony because I had a really nice place because I could afford it at the time. And I was like, is this it? And I was, in my young 20s. At that point I had done everything that I think I was supposed to do. So I was, I did well in school. I, was president of all the clubs, graduated in 3 years, got the good job. And I realized that I was living, a life for me that my father wanted me to live. And so that was kind of, I faltered back and forth for probably a period of 6 months of really not wanting this to be my life, but not wanting to let my dad down. And so at some point, the thing that kind of pushed me over the edge was I can either, die to myself or I can die to my father. And at the end of the day, I have to survive. So I will, if I make this decision and he no longer wants to be my dad, then I can accept that.
Wow, is that extreme then?
Yes.
Say more about that. Are you an only child?
Yeah. So only child, raised by a single father, Middle Eastern. He was born in Iran. And, everything in my life up until that point was really just to make him proud. So it was very much a seeking approval, seeking validation kind of drive at that point in my life. And so the idea of disappointing him or not getting his approval felt like death. And at that point, I was actually contemplating not living. You have watched some of my YouTube stuff. Mortality has been the single biggest driver and the biggest decisions that I've made in my life. And it has become a more routine process for decision making for me in general. Because I think it provides clarity and it provides context to most of the decisions we have, which the vast majority of them don't matter, which is helpful in and of themselves. And then, beyond that, it helps me make the decisions that I think removes everyone else from the playbook. Because if you study subjective well-being and how people perceive how they're doing in their own lives, it looks like a smiley face. So 7-year-olds think they're killing life. And then it drops dramatically between 20 and 30. And then there's still a little bit more of a dip right around 45. That's like when people are their true, they hate life the most. and then it kind of slowly goes up until like 55, 60. And then it shoots right back up again when people see that they're going to die and that life is short and that they can make the decisions without worrying about the ramifications of other people. And some of the people they're worried about are also dead. And so it was using that context for that biggest decision that's been duplicated many times in my life since then, because if I have a good decision-making algorithm, I try and reuse it as many times as I can.
Let's unpack it for the audience a little bit. So, when we're 7, we don't have a care in the world. Mm-hmm. The artist or the whatever we want to be has not been beaten out of us yet. Right. No one's told us that we are not what we think we are. Yeah. We're still popping wheelies and climbing trees and falling out, and that's okay. And then you get to your 20s and 30s and the rubber hits the road a little bit. And if you've made money, I guess, and if that's your sign of success, then you're okay. But if not, you're kind of hosed. Then in your 40s, I'm guessing you start to have more life experience. 50s, maybe you start caring less what people think. And then you fast forward all the way to maybe near death. Mm-hmm. And then you really get to a point where you don't care what anyone says and you really boil it down to what's important. And probably I'm guessing that's love, relationships, legacy, and then you're just like, peace out.
I think for most people, yes. Yeah. For me specifically, the legacy piece less so, but I think for most people, yes.
And why is the legacy piece less important?
More so, and whenever I get into this topic, I think a lot of, some people get sensitive about it, and so I just like to put the disclaimer, this is not me judging your beliefs, and me stating my beliefs is in no way a judgment on anyone else. But if you just look at expanding the time horizon over a much longer period of time, if you look at it in 10,000 years or 100,000 years or 1,000,000 years, right? The easy way to test this is to go backwards, right? Which is, do you know your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather? Probably not. And then if you look at it from a how much has somebody achieved standpoint, I happen to be in an interesting situation where my great-great-grandfather was in the ruling class in Iran, and he had 400 children. So he would literally, ruled and had a lot of wealth. He had a lot of wives to create 400 children, right? And I actually still can't remember his name because my dad told me one time and I can't remember it. And I've never seen any of the quote legacy that I'm sure he felt like he was leaving. And so if that was that level of success and legacy, and only 4 or 5 generations later, I don't even remember the man's name, nor do I have any piece of that legacy.
Yeah.
It seems a little bit irrelevant. When the revolution happened in Iran, we talk about legacy. Lands, buildings, houses, bank accounts. Government just says those are ours now. That's it. There's your legacy. Gone. So that's why I'm like, and people are like, I want to build a legacy. I'm like, U.S. might not even be the superpower in 500 years. Your kids might be in Bangladesh. Who knows? India might be the hot spot in 500. No one knows, right? And I think on a long enough time horizon, we're all screwed. And I think in some ways people find that incredibly disheartening. But an equal opposite is you can't find it both disheartening and also not freeing, because all of the decisions that we're making that are not for ourselves or are subject to change that we feel pressure from, whether that be societal, I'll put quotes there because that's a big word, or family, friends, expectations that we perceive others people to have of us. If you can just relinquish all of those chains, I think it's incredibly freeing. And I choose to live that way.
That advice is good because it helps us live in the moment. Because even if you believe in something after, that's still in the future.
Yeah.
And there's a question mark because no one actually knows with knowledge what happens or if something happens. So you might as well live in the present, make the best of it.
Yeah. An interesting one that I thought through around that was a lot of us, not a lot of us, all of us have 100% experience not being alive. Right? Before we were born, we were not alive. And so we know what that was like. There was nothing that we can recollect. Right. And so I would imagine that that's the closest experience that we can have to not being alive yet again, which to me is not that frightening.
Yeah. And it is freeing, you're right, because it's both humbling to know that you don't matter in the grand scheme of things, but at the same time, you matter infinitely if you just focus on the present and the mark that you're going to leave here and now.
I contemplated, I had to die to my father or die to myself, and I realized that I would rather die to him, which pretty much ended up happening. And so my fears were relatively justified. He was not in support of the things that I wanted to do. I ended up quitting that job, sold everything I had, packed my car, went to California, because that's where I thought the land of fitness opportunity was, because that was the only thing I really enjoyed. Mentored under a guy for a few months to try and at least learn the ropes. Started my first facility, slept on the floor for the first 9 months, which was a very terrible experience for me.
And timestamp the age for me now?
I was 23.
Got it. So you graduated early, you got that dream job, and then you bailed.
Yep. 2 years. And that was really at the time, and all of this it was at a splitting point where I had done 2 years, and the kind of career path traditionally is like 2 to 4 years of management consulting, and then you go back to an Ivy League 4-year GMAT, and then from there you go into, you can go do investment banking, you can do private equity, you can do, some of the bigger white collar jobs, but I didn't want more of what I had. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that I would have a better shot taking $200,000 in 2 years, which is what the economic equivalent of what the degree was, and starting something of my own. And I figured I would learn more in the first 2 years, and with that money, and maybe even have a business by the end of that period of time that made an equivalent amount of money compared to what I would have had as a job offer.
But what signals did you get? I mean, you're saying like I wasn't feeling it, but like where was your motivation? Because I see you as this hustler, this go-getter, all about gobbling up new opportunities. Mm-hmm. It transcends beyond that now, but like at first it sounds like you were just all about the go-get. But how did you know?
I mean, at first I was driven by fear.
Okay.
It was all fear. Fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of other people's judgment.
Right. What did your dad end up saying? Did he say, good luck with you?
No, he thought he was stupid. He thought I was wasting my life.
Yeah.
And wasted a degree that he had spent money on, and wasted a good job opportunity that he had set up for me, all these things.
Right. In his defense, did he immigrate here?
Yeah.
Okay, so in his defense,
100%.
Right? And I just want to tell the audience so that they're not like, but. It's like, if you have...
justified in saying that.
Yeah, if you escape from a country where there's trauma and impending danger, then your son squanders an opportunity, you might get a little anxious about that.
100%. I mean, my dad came here with $1,000, and a medical degree.
Yeah.
And then built everything. Didn't even speak English.
Right.
I think what he did was harder than what I've done. Like I got to stand on his shoulders.
Okay. In what way?
I mean, I speak English.
Okay.
Like just the basics. Like I speak English. I went to a good school. Just all the support infrastructure, known and unknown, that was around me to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's healthy to recognize your privilege
Yeah.
But at the same time, it came with lots of baggage too. And so you had signals which were mainly fear-based.
Yeah, and I mean, the biggest thing that made the decision for me, I would say I had the logical decision and then I had the emotional decision. The emotional decision was, I don't want to do this. This is not the life I want to lead. I am not happy doing this every day. I would prefer to not be alive if this is what my life will be continuously. If I would prefer to not be alive, then that kind of opens up my decision calculus.
And what was it, I'm trying to put my finger on, what was it that made you happy? Was it just the freedom to do what you want?
I didn't know what made me happy. I knew it was not making me happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's another important lesson too, if I can just extract them. I'm sure a lot of people watching, they feel the same kind of family pressure. They want to be what other people expect them to be, if that's who you are. And that's totally normal. But we should always remember the context in which that advice is given. Could be given through the lens of a certain lifestyle, a certain time frame.
Totally.
But I think that's a thing. Whether you're young or middle age, you're trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up. You're trying to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
Because it seems like we don't like uncertainty. But I think your message, if I'm hearing you, is sometimes you have to try it on for size to see if it fits or not. And you get it on and you're like, well, I thought that dream job was going to be perfect, but turns out, it's tight in the crotch. It's like, I need something different.
Mm-hmm. And I think giving yourself permission to do that. And as a side to what you were saying about my dad, education saved his life. He was only able to leave the country because he was educated. And so there's very deep roots there, and I can appreciate that. But for this context or for my life, it just wasn't appropriate.
Right.
And when we did come to terms later, the only time he's ever apologized to me in my life and said, but to be fair, in my time, I would have been right.
Oh, absolutely.
And he would have been. It's just not the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't that it was inappropriate. It was just out of context and didn't necessarily translate to this new life.
I love the saying, in our 20s, we're concerned about what everyone thinks about us. In our 40s, we don't care what anyone thinks about us. And in our 60s, we realize that no one was thinking about us to begin with.
Right.
And I just feel like who else have you thought about today besides yourself? Probably not. I mean, you have your kids, which is an extension of yourself. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not a lot. And so most people are like that. And, a lot of it, we have a lot more leeway than I think we give ourselves credit for. And I think the more that I have now, I'll say accomplished with quotes in material success, the more I am excited about the things that I can do. And that was why the opening of the book was there are no rules. Mm-hmm. And it just took me a very long time to realize that. And I continue to unlearn rules that I thought existed, as I continue to, go on this journey. Yeah,
I love that idea of unlearning.
I think we all just try and go back to being like we were when we were children. Just because when you're a child, you're purely present, right? You're just present in the moment. Yeah. And I don't like the word happy very much. I prefer using joy because you can mourn joyfully. Right, because it's internal rather than happiness, which I feel is more like happenstance. It's more from external, and so what are the things that bring me joy? What are the things that I find joy in? And I think for anyone who's listening, it's a much harder question to answer. What are the things that bring me joy, than answering the question, what are the things I hate? And it's easier to correct those first. You're like, well, I hate my job and I hate my relationship and I hate the city. Okay, those are all very changeable. And a lot of times you get there by inversion. Well, if I wanted to destroy my life, I wanted to have the worst life possible, what would I do? And then taking all those things that you would do to really destroy your life and make your life miserable and then reverse them. It's a much easier way to solve the positive psychology equation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm remembering this Picasso quote, which is, I think he said, everyone is born an artist. Yeah. Right? And then eventually we get convinced that we're not.
Yeah.
And we have to really just strip away and get back to basics.